Hi,
Hello,
Mark.
everybody. Hey, Juanita, how are you today?
I'm good. Where are you coming from today?
Today, I'm in downtown Millmerran again. So
No,
I had yesterday Millmerran. Yes, it's. I'm sure everyone knows where that is. Very famous place.
I do know.
And yesterday it was Gundawindi or Gundawindi or Gundawindi as everyone calls it. So yesterday Gundawindi. And doing a whole lot of work based on the presentation I did there last week, which was really rewarding. That a number of people sort of got value out of the day, and so here we are helping them with their family succession planning. But what about yourself?
Fantastic.
You're downtown Brisbane.
Downtown Brisbane CBD. I wish I had a lovely view for you, but I do not.
Well, you know that guy behind you in the window. You know,
Now, let's hope
there's
they
no
keep
one
it
there.
nice and tidy in
Uh,
those windows behind me.
yeah, absolutely. Anyway, it's great to have everyone here today. As usual, we're talking about all things estate and succession, and hopefully you're getting some real value out of some of the topics we're discussing here. And at the risk of flogging a dead horse, Juanita, you know, once I got at Gundawindi, and when we're talking about Gunsend here, that was my joke for the day.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know my racehorses.
The issue was, it just kept coming up time and time again, was the issue of communication in estate and succession planning, and I know that just gets raised, so I thought I'd pull it out right at the start. That was what everyone was conversing about, was how important it was to have great communication within the family. And you know, when the people in the audience were talking about their experiences, all came down to lack of communication or bad communication. But today I thought, seeing here I am out in Millmerran while you're sitting safely in Brisbane, I thought I'd just ask you some Dear Dorothy Dix questions. And the first one I wanted to ask you was, how do you create an incontestable will?
So you're going to put me on the spot again this week. So I must have done well last week, hey? I didn't get any preparation time. So
I figure you do better without preparations.
Okay. So what was the question? So how do you make an incontestable will?
Yes. Can you make an incontestable will?
Yeah, the short answer is no, but there are strategies. Yeah, of course. Well, no is the answer, but there are strategies that we can use to make the risk less and less of someone contesting, and if they do, of being successful. And no doubt we'll be going and having a bit of a chat about those strategies. But the law says if someone is eligible to contest a will, and that's a spouse, a child, or a dependent, then they can. And you can't contract out of that. You can't put a clause in your will which says that you don't want it. That is the law. But the next step is they may be eligible, but whether they are successful or not is the question. And as you well know, Mark, there are things that we can put in place to minimise the likelihood of them being successful should an eligible person contest your will.
Wow, that was a lot of words, but I think I understood them all. So let's you're talking about eligible people and contestable will.
Yeah.
So you know, it seems more and more, and I've told this story before, you know, when I checked into a hotel last year down in Dubbo, turned on the TV and there was the ad, you know, dial 1-800 contest the will, sort of, you know, have you been aggrieved? Are you a beneficiary of an estate? You think you should have more money, and all that sort of stuff. And so, you know, others in your profession at the other end are making a living out of contesting estates, because in many cases the fees come out of the not in all cases, I know you've explained that, but many times they come out of the pool of assets, so to speak. So what are the strategies that you think work? And I'll give you some of the ones I think as well, but what are the strategies you think work in regard to minimising the chance of successfully contesting what someone has said they want to happen?
Yeah, well, the first one you've already touched on, haven't you? And I was very interested to hear that your participants in your workshop brought up communication, because we joke about it, but we have that word has come up in every single week, no matter what topic we've talked about. So it's not a joke. It's actually obviously a reality out there, you know, in our client land. So having the communication and the conversations prior to someone dying can help people understand why they've left their estate or their will the way that they have. And although it's not going to stop someone necessarily contesting a will, it can go a long way to taking some of the anger and resentment perhaps out, or bewilderment, or not knowing why someone's left it that way. So I'm sure you've got some good examples of that, Mark, where you know, it's not going to necessarily resolve it, but it will go a long way into helping that situation.
Look, absolutely. I've had the reason I bought it first was I've had two conversations this week with children where they were asking questions about how they contest the will if they're not happy with what mum and dad have left for them. Wow. Now, if we wind this backwards, I mean, it goes right back, and I think next week what we'll do is we'll talk about my gratitude conversation I have with children of clients in regard to you know, come on guys, let's really think about this, because what your parents are talking about is actually leaving you a gift. And seriously, like, you know, you're standing up saying, oh, I want. Remember that an estate is an opportunity for a parent or friend or whoever to gift something to you. Is that correct? It's a gift, isn't it?
That is correct. Aspiration, not expectation.
Yeah. So, you know, I get sometimes absolutely bemused when people front up with an absolute expectation and an entitlement attitude. So hence why I've created this gratitude conversation. And as I say, let's put that to the side. I'll go through that with you next week. But no, I had someone this week that rang me, a son of a client, and it used every I think there was a couple of words I hadn't actually heard before, rude words I hadn't heard before. But they basically said, if my parents don't give me what I think I'm entitled to, I'm going to sue their backsides and contest the will. And I just thought, well, what a sad situation, number one, and how unfortunate that the relationship between a child and a parent was so diminished. But I mean, the bottom line was, you know, it's still my role to try and create an environment when I'm talking to the parents, and I can't betray the confidence of what the children have said to me, but it's my role to try and make sure that the will is as fair as it possibly can be, so that there is no, whilst they may still choose to contest the will, the likelihood of it succeeding is close enough to zero. And that's why is there such a thing as an incontestable will? And I guess what I'm really saying is, sure, they can all be contested, but how do you minimise the opportunity for anyone to ever successfully contest the will?
Yeah, and so to elaborate a bit further on that, I guess the goal you're trying to achieve is to minimise the assets in your estate. That if someone does contest your will, that pool of assets will be exposed. So how do we do that? So this is what I mean when I say there are strategies we can use. So some examples are one, jointly owned assets. So when two people own an asset together, for example, a property is joint tenants or a bank account jointly, and one of them dies, the other becomes the sole owner. That asset doesn't go through the deceased person's will. So that works okay when you've got a married couple, for example, but it's still a little bit problematic because when the second person dies, then that's no longer jointly owned, obviously. So it can work in some situations, but looking ahead in the future, it's not necessarily the best strategy to fix that problem permanently. Other strategies we can use are use of trusts, particularly outside the estate. So if you hold assets in a trust, when you pass away, those assets remain owned by that trust. They don't form part of your individual assets that you leave in a will. What you need to deal with is the control of that trust, which is something you can do in your will, and that's the key. That's very important. However, those assets will stay. Here's my little puppet hands again. Those assets will stay in that trust and won't form your your pool of assets that could be contested if someone contests. So there's sort of two examples that can achieve the goal of minimising the assets in your estate. So if someone does contest it, there is less to fight over, I guess.
Well, the other thing is, for some parents, they could gift the assets away, couldn't they, before they're dead?
Right.
And there's some strategies there, aren't there, in regard to where people don't have a lot of assets, or they have some assets and they are looking towards getting Social Security in their retirement. They can actually gift their assets away to a child who's going to take over the property, for example, and that will is there something about a 5-year? You're the smart one here. There's a 5-year period, is that right?
So gifting is definitely an option, of course, that is before you die, but you really need to do so cautiously with the right advice, because there are sometimes unintended implications of gifting, such as stamp duty, such as capital gains tax implications, such as effects on your potential Centrelink entitlements. And as you mentioned, there are clawback provisions that can apply for some years after. So these are things which may detract from that being a viable option for some people. So definitely a potential strategy, but it must come with the right fulsome advice, I guess.
Yeah. Look, absolutely. Look, getting back to the actual point, which was, communication and, how do you minimise the chance of someone contesting a will? We'll come back again and say it's all about having conversations, isn't it? And it's all about making sure that there is a communication between the parents and the children, assuming we're talking about parents and the children. And Juanita, we're doing a lot of quizzes with clients at the moment, asking a lot of questions, and whenever we can, we get them to rate what are the most important things in regard to their own situation with estate and succession planning. And I'm just going to tell you, over, out of seven questions we use, there's about 50 to 60% come back as communication between the generations. In other words, bad communication between the generations, and the next highest one is conflict between generations. In other words, Dad's run the farm his way for the last 40 years. Johnny's come along, who's 32, 33. He's been away to college. He's got all these new ideas. There's new things they can do in regard to testing soil and blah, 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 blah. And, Dad says, well, we didn't do it that way before. So there's conflict, but also because of the unknowns, because, little Johnny doesn't know whether, the 20 years he spent on the farm means that he'll have an opportunity to either buy it off Dad or take it over one day, because Dad doesn't know how to have that conversation. So if you want to look at contesting a will, if Johnny's worked there for 20 years and his other brother hasn't done any work on the farm, and Dad splits the money down the middle to the two boys if Mum and Dad go, I mean, there's actually a reason why you would contest a will. So,
and I was thinking as you were talking that there's also conflict sometimes between siblings. This is not always the generation, right? It's between the siblings, and those sort of examples that you just gave are quite specific, being quite common in these days with rural families. It's certainly nothing unusual that you described that made me fall off the chair. It's actually a quite common challenge that we're seeing from our clients. A couple of points I thought would be worth adding were just one strategy that I didn't mention that is a useful tool to protect your assets from being contested potentially. And I won't go into too much complication, but it's basically creating a debt between another entity. So you might have heard the terminology of a gift and loan back or an equity transfer strategy. And by creating a debt that you owe to another entity, then that needs to be paid out basically before you die. And again, that can reduce your asset pool. So that's just another little strategy that that your advisor can give you an option about. I did want to add about a little bit more about contesting wills, because we've said that the type of person that's eligible, and you can't stop them being eligible. And I did say whether they're successful or not is another story. And so it's a misconception that if someone contests the will, they will get something. That is just simply not correct, because whether they get something or not, it is good. Whether they get something or not is considered in a two-stage question. The first of all is if were they left with adequate provision in the will, yes or no? And if they weren't, then what provision should they get? And in answering that second question, the court, I will say, however, most of these matters never ever get to court. They're usually settled well before that, or dismissed if it's a frivolous claim. But the court would look at things like, first of all, what need does that person have? So what is their financial situation? Do they have any financial needs, medical needs? Who do they support? Are they supported by anyone else? What does their spouse earn? What other beneficiaries were in the will? How big is the estate? What was their relationship like with the deceased person? Did they help that person emotionally or financially? So all of these things are looked at in its entirety to come to a view as to what that person should, if anything, get if they were to contest a will. So you can see that it's not a formula. It's not straightforward. Every situation is different, but yeah, not everyone will be successful. Not every child wins a prize.
Nor should they. No, that's right. Actually, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, and I'll come back to the comment again, it's a gift. An estate distribution is the opportunity for a person to gift, money or things to someone they care about and they want to gift to. And in some ways, it's interesting, isn't it, that I can have full intention that I want to distribute my wealth this way and that way. And yet that can be contested. It's kind of weird in some ways, but
yeah,
then
it is.
you probably need protection.
And I guess without getting into boring history, like the historical concept of that is that a person has some sort of moral obligation to their spouse and their child.
Sure.
However, that changes over time in that an adult child, for example, who's financially independent and may not have any need, is completely different to, for example, a minor child who obviously hasn't got the ability to earn and has a lot of years that needs maintenance. Sure. So that sort of moral obligation becomes less and less and less as the family member gets older, I guess. So a lot of people say, well, what's the point of doing a will then? And that's a whole other topic. I think we've done that before. But
we've done that one.
Yeah.
No, good point. One of the things that I've found, and to the clients I've dealt with more recently, it's pretty much been exactly the same situation. Mum and dad, they have a property. They have one property. Very, very little assets outside the property. 2 children. In fact, in both these cases, 2 children, and only one child can take over the farm. And yet the other one is still very interested in wishing to take over the farm as well if they had an opportunity. And you can have all the logical conversations in regard to there's only room, and there is in all these cases. There's only the farm only just supports one family, which raises another issue in regard to how do you look after mum and dad for the next 20 years as well. But assuming mum and dad had passed away last night and there's 2 children, one farm, and both have an interest, and one may have worked on it for 2 years and the other one's off at uni or something like that and hasn't had the chance yet. So these are the sorts of things that I'm brought in to help people resolve more and more often. But I'd really like your opinion, and I'm putting you on the spot here. I know in regard to, from your experience, how do these sorts of things best get resolved so that the second child, whether it's a boy or a girl, doesn't matter. How do these things best get resolved so that at the end of the day you can create fairness between both children? You're never going to create financial fairness, but how do you create fairness so that there's no animosity and no fighting, contesting wills and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a super tough one, isn't it? Because but it's a real practical situation, and I think there are really, in reality, a few options here. One is that the children would inherit that property jointly, But as we know, that comes with so many difficulties and practicalities that we would not normally recommend that. And in very few situations have we seen that work successfully, because even with the best of intentions, two children or two families farming or working or sharing a property is just a little bit of a recipe for disaster when it comes down to the nitty gritty. So
they get married. They get married one day, don't they?
They do. They do.
The children get married, and that's mostly when the problems start. Yeah.
And people have different views about how to run a business too. So it's tough. Sure. It's absolutely tough. The next option is to sell the property, of course, sell the business, sell the property and split the proceeds. Clean, but I totally get that there's a lot of emotional attachment too that comes with, some of these properties have been in families for generations, and that is the wish ongoing. So, that's also not always a viable option. And likewise, it's sometimes, a great opportunity to give a child a startup in business, or that child might be particularly interested in that business. So that would be a pity to lose that opportunity for that child too. So, definitely selling and liquidating is an option, but for those reasons, sometimes not a very palatable option, which, we lawyers totally get. We're not all cold-blooded, I do get the emotion behind that. I think probably the most practical solution, if it's possible, is where one child potentially gets the farming or the business assets, and the other child may get other assets, for example, outside the estate, such as superannuation and life insurance, perhaps. So, with an estate, we can certainly appropriate assets, which means direct them to different people in the proportions that were left in the will. So, that's certainly a viable option. That all depends on what's in the estate, doesn't it, and how big the estate is. And there's ways we can deal with that. For example, the child that may inherit the farming property may come to some arrangement where he pays back the sibling, he or she, she or he may pay back that sibling over a number of years. But at the same time, we don't want that child to be burdened with debt for the next 10, 20 years. And often the farming properties will be the ones that carry a bit of debt with them. So, you really have to, I think, talk through what the end goal of the client is, of the parents, and give them some of those possibilities and nut it out how that can best work for the children, if that is the case that they're trying to benefit.
Look, absolutely. And in some cases there's more than two children, and really the property can sometimes be the only asset, the property and the stock and equipment and so on. And so you can't give a property without the equipment to run it, and if there's no cattle on there, then it's pointless anyway. So and it probably has debt as well. So you're right. The strategies in regard to over the next 10 years, you might pay the other sibling an amount of money. If there's life insurance, super, all those things are absolutely right. But the other issue is, I guess, and I've really just stumbled on this at the moment, and because a lot of these people I'm talking to at the moment, there's very little money in the farming business or the grazing business, and I guess the truth is it's because there's been 3-4 really bad years and droughts in a lot of these areas out here, and so they've become accustomed to the fact that there's no money, they're not making any money, they're not making any headway with the debt, and so they see this doom and gloom ahead. But in reality, that they could die in a car accident last night. The kid takes over, and in the next 5 years, it's lush green pastures and fat cows and so on. And the kid that gets the farm could end up making $1 gazillion, and the poor other child ends up, with whatever pittance was in the insurance, or the house in town or something like that. So it's not an easy thing to pull together, because you're right, you don't want to create a commitment on the one on the farm just in case the next 10 years are all droughts. So it's a hard one to toss up, and sometimes
you could potentially connect that sort of payment with profit, I suppose. Depending on what profit is generated, perhaps that triggers some sort of contribution or payments. But then, then you want to be clear about how that's calculated, so you don't have people fudging the accounts to get out of obligation. So, yeah, really tricky.
I needed to go first class to Acapulco to attend an agricultural conference with my 5 best friends.
Yes, right.
Just to bring the profit down.
Yeah.
No, that's
Strange
right. But I
things
mean,
happen,
look, absolutely. But it's just a topical issue at the moment, because I seem to be striking a whole lot of people where, the farm really is enough only for one person, and they've got more than one child, and a lot of times there's a whole emotional connection with the property. It's been a family for 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever, and they don't want to lose that connection with the family.
Yeah.
The other point too is, of course, has gone totally out of my mind, and so
Well,
I had something really good I was going to tell you.
I think, as you can see, these practical problems, they are challenges. There's no doubt about it, depending on the circumstance of the client. But I think they are best dealt with well in advance, because it's when you don't talk through these things that we've just been talking through in the last 15 minutes, the different possibilities and the different challenges, that you can leave a real big fat mess behind if something happened to you last night and you hadn't had this thought process, I hadn't had this conversation. Imagine that. Like, imagine not, we might have raised something today that you hadn't thought of. And imagine, and imagine the people left behind trying to work through that. It would certainly be very messy. So I guess the point of what I'm trying to say is that these challenges are not insurmountable, but they are best dealt with now. The sooner the better. So you can plan ahead and have these conversations, such as you do, Mark, with the family, and plan ahead financially for what you want to leave when you do pass away in the future. Yeah,
and at the risk of being repetitive, I mean, at the end of the day, it just comes back to communication again. And here's the positive thing. So I'm going to tell you what I've determined out of these people that I've been talking to over the last few weeks, is that even though you can't be equal in any form, in fact, you can't in a lot of cases even be fair. Like there's a big gap between equal and fair. 2 things come out of it, and that is, if you have the conversation and everyone talks about this, the second person has the opportunity to get on with their life and do their own stuff anyway, which is what you'd want for any of your kids anyway, is the ability to be able to go out independently and create their future and create their wealth and so on. So the not knowing is what kills most people. The not knowing is what causes most of the grief and aggravation and arguments. So having this conversation now, saying, Harry, you're going to get the farm, Fred, you're going to have to go away and do your own thing. Everyone can get on with their life. So you've created, you've helped, because then there's no expectation from the second guy that he's ever going to get it, and he can get on with his life and may well become even more successful than the guy that ended up with the farm. And the second thing is, most of these people, when they're handing the farm to one child, that child's going to hold on to that farm and pass it on to the next generation anyway. They're going to pass it on to their children. So it's not like you've just said, hey, Harry, here's $10 million. It's like, hey, Harry, here's an opportunity for you to have a lifestyle, to live on the family farm, to get on with your life, do the things you love doing. We're not really giving you money. We're giving you the chance to go out there and work your backside off, and in good years, you'll do okay, and in bad years, you're going to struggle like hell. So, because they're keeping it and passing on to the next generation, it's not like they're giving them cash. So, in a lot of cases, somebody getting $2 million cash could even be a better deal, like $2 million worth of properties where they're getting rental income, could be a better deal than a $10 million property with $3 million worth of debt. So $7 million geared, worrying about droughts, floods, and fires could be better than $2 million. Sorry, $2 million cash could be better than something you're just going to hand on to your kids anyway. So
yeah, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and we have a really good product called a distribution matrix, which I know you've seen, Mark, where we particularly handy when there's multiple children in a family, and we list all the assets and have a column with each child and the values and the debt, and then you can get to the tax implications perhaps, and you can get to a position where you see roughly, well, not roughly, exactly what each child would be inheriting. and you can play around with that a bit if you're not comfortable with that share, etc. So it's really handy, especially for people that are visual, to see that product we have.
Yep, absolutely. Anyway, our time's up today. Juanita, thank you. We did a great job today, and thank you for your contribution. It's always great speaking with you.
Give ourselves a pat on the back.
Can we give ourselves a pat on the back? So, and I'm going to say today's episode is brought to you by Rural Succession Solutions and Murdoch Lawyers, Juanita Maiden. So, thanks, Juanita. See you next week.
Bye now.
Oops, hold on. I've got to press this button and play this.